really trying to be as even keeled as I can about this because I'm really not trying to let any hype build that's not worth the hype or overblow anything here, but I don't think the draft could have gone any better. Good afternoon, good Monday afternoon. My name is Chris Halicke here on the Southside Beat. Thank you for joining me today. It was one heck of a weekend for the Pittsburgh Steelers and widely reviewed by just about everybody who's covered the draft. Widely reviewed as one of the best, if not the best draft in the entire league. And that's really not hyperbole. I almost have no words to describe it. I really can't quite put it together. I had no way of envisioning it going this way. Pete says even PFF gave it an A. No, they did not. They gave it an A+. They gave it the best grade you can possibly get, unless you start adding pluses to A+. I mean, I don't understand it. Obviously, the last time we talked, the only pick that had been made to that point had been obviously Fou Tanu on Thursday night, first round. We already, broke that down, didn't foresee that happening. So, I was just kind of like, wow, this is pretty intense, pretty surprising. And then obviously we haven't had a show since Friday afternoon. So Friday night happened, Saturday happened. They get Zach Frazier in the second round at 51. They don't have to trade up for him. Roman Wilson falls all the way down to 84. So they snag him, address receiver. Okay. Then they go at 98, and the best linebacker, off-ball linebacker, Peyton Wilson, is still there for the plucking. And so they snatch him, and then they turn around Saturday, get themselves a mauler in the fourth round, and Mason McCormack out of South Dakota State. We had talked about him a few different times on the show about being a possibility. And then, even after the lull of not having a fifth round pick, they turn around to the sixth, and they get Logan Lee out of Iowa and Ryan Watts out of Texas. Obviously Lee, defensive tackle, played in the Big Ten. And then Watts, another long cornerback who's physical, who can probably play multiple spots. Probably would be best served in the slot or maybe even at safety, but still can play multiple positions, has good size, is a physical guy. It was a complete home run. This is already just in terms of initial reaction, trying to go back and break down what happened or how we all felt after the draft last year. Even initial reactions were like, okay, this was a really good class. They got Broderick Jones, they got Joey Porter Jr., Keanu Benton in the second round. Got Darnell Washington was that one player that just fell and the Steelers snagged. Nick Herbig was kind of another one of those guys, and the initial reaction was, man, this is a really solid draft. They really kind of hit this one out of the park. And this year, dare I say, I think I feel even better about this class than I do about last year's, because it wasn't just the fact that they addressed positions of need. Yes, they did that. They got themselves a starting center. They, added to the receiver room with some talent. I would consider second round talent, and, got him in the third. They added the best linebacker in the draft. I mean, it wasn't just the fact that they addressed positions of need. They added high quality guys, especially in those first four picks. I mean, high quality players. These are Fou Tanu, probably I think saying that he was the fourth best tackle in a good class is pretty fair. And for picking 20th overall to get the 4th best tackle, you're pretty lucky to get that. 5th best at the absolute worst, if you, in case, you liked Fuaga a little bit more than Fou Tanu. Second round, Zach Frazier, at the bare minimum, 3rd best center in the draft class, but comes without the medical concerns that Jackson Powers Johnson has. And just, again, a phenomenal pick. Roman Wilson, probably not a top 10 receiver in this class, but definitely kind of in that, you can make an argument for it, like in this particular class. But with all the things that he does, he really is a phenomenal replacement for Deontay Johnson, but somebody who's a little bit more physical, somebody who's going to be able to block a little bit better. Maybe can't get quite the separation and that Deontay got, but a little bit more sure-handed and a little bit of a better blocker. I think it's a phenomenal pick. And then Peyton Wilson, like I said, the best linebacker in the class. The only question is, like, how are the knees going to hold up, especially the knee that's missing an ACL? How are the knees going to hold up over the course of his career? And then McCormack, man, it's like the sky's the limit for him. I even hesitated. So I did a chalk talk. If you haven't read it yet, I did a chalk talk diving deep into the film on Zach Frazier and Mason McCormack, because I almost wanted to, whenever that happened, I wanted to follow up, because I did one, the night that Fou Tanu got selected. So I wanted to do another one on the other 2 guys who were added to the offensive line, just to kind of be like, okay, here's everything about the new guys who are, because obviously the trenches were a big focus of the draft. 3 of the 7 picks were on the offensive line. And then even, continuing in the trenches, Logan Lee addresses the defensive line. And I wanted to do that, but I used a comparison whenever I was using a clip of Mason McCormack pulling. I was like, just watching how easy it is for him to pull on like a counter or a power or whatever it is. Like, it almost reminds me of watching Alan Faneca. And I almost didn't want to say that, because I'm like, that's already putting too high of expectations on him. Because even though I'm not saying he's going to become Alan Faneca, because he's a Hall of Famer. I mean, come on. I'm just saying he makes it look so easy. Like, watching Alan Faneca pull the way he did and lay out blocks, it was just, when you watch the tape of Mason McCormack, he's doing it against FCS schools. And obviously we watched Alan Faneca do that for years against NFL players. So there's the difference. But the sky's the limit, because the dude's a heck of an athlete and he's a mauler. He's got a mauler's mentality, man. It's a heck of a class. The top 4 picks in the top 100 would be, they're already big time picks. And then if Mason McCormack even lives up to becoming a starter capable guard, man, 5 picks that have a really great opportunity to just be an absolute home run here. A couple of the things on Peyton Wilson's knee. Larry says, Hines Ward didn't have an ACL. And then, Lori here says, no ACL to tear. It's like, yes, those are correct. And like, listen, I'm not going to sit here and try to rain on anybody's parade about it, but it's not one of those situations where you can just, oh, well, Hines Ward didn't have one, so it'll work out. It's like, no, every player's different. They're playing different positions. And really just every human body is different. So it's from I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to sit here and try to pretend. I'm not going to sit here and try to pretend that I know what I'm talking about, because I don't. I really, really want to yield to the experts on that. So, but I would assume, listen, like the ACL is a big time ligament in the knee, and if there isn't one, that means that all of the other ligaments and cartilage and everything else have to work a little extra to absorb the impact of not having that in your knee. And so, but Mark says it right here, at 98th overall, he's worth the risk 100%, because the dude he's a football player. He's fast. He's physical. Like, dare I say Ryan Shazier, like, diet version a little bit. Not quite as fast, not quite as athletic, but really close in terms of measurables, in terms of potential. I don't know, man. Like, I'm not going to try to put those kind of expectations on him because Ryan Shazier, right near the end, before he obviously had the career-ending injury, was, in my opinion, a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. Not necessarily Defensive Player of the Year winner or would have been a slam dunk, but, candidate in the running, worthy of consideration. Like, he was that type of a player at a position where it's really, really hard to win that in today's NFL, because a lot of the time that's either going to go to an edge rusher or a cornerback. Most of the time, an edge rusher, somebody who helps get after the quarterback. So I have no at 98th overall, to me, it's a no brainer. I remember, like, Friday night, like, 51 came up, Zach Frazier was still there. I'm like, this is going to be Zach Frazier. Like, I'm just saying, like, it's going to be Frazier. And it was. 84, I was a little, not as sure, like, what they might do. But once they took Roman Wilson and then they get to 98, I was like, dude, Peyton Wilson's still there. Like, are they going to take him? Like, I mean, because we talked about this on the show. We talked about how, yes, linebacker is a lot more secure of a position since they signed Patrick Queen, because even the duo of Patrick Queen and Landon Roberts is pretty solid. But holy crap, man, like, we talked about, like, if all else failed in the second round, that guy might have been worth a second round pick. Like, if all else failed, if tackle didn't work out, if center didn't work out, if receivers or corners, you would have to be reaching for those positions. And he were the best player on the board at that point, that he might have been worth a pick at 51. Now, we obviously didn't know as much about the medical concerns as we do now, but down to 98th overall, to me, it's a no-brainer. You tip your cap to the rest of the league. You say, thank you very much, and you move on, and it's worth the risk. Because if he turns into a player and the medical concerns are nothing, that might be the steal of the entire draft completely. And that's not easy to say, because Roman Wilson, really talented receiver. Mason McCormack, mauler, very athletic. Probably the most athletic player for his position in the entire class for the Steelers. Zach Frazier, plug-and-play center. Troy Fou Tanu. Like, it's a phenomenal class, man. Initial reactions, I can't find anything negative to say about it. I might, like, if I have to try to find something, when they were getting to that second, 6th round pick, when they got to that second, 6th round pick, I almost was like, just take Brendan Rice. Just take Jerry's kid, get that DNA in the room, and let's see what happens. Double dip at receiver. But but at the same time, they hadn't addressed corner. It was good. It's good to add that, and work phone left that on. I can't argue with the pick. I really can't. It would have been interesting to see Brendan Rice, just because you never know, man. Like, the guy, it's Jerry Rice's kid. I don't know, but I have nothing to complain about. AJ Dub coming in with a $50 contribution. Appreciate that, AJ. Phenomenal. Thank you so much. AJ says, thank you for keeping up with the coverage on YouTube. It seems Mo canceled the extra show today. Looking forward to getting more informed by reading your articles. Very excited to see what Danny Smith can do with some of these guys. And and by the way, thank you so much. Yes, there is plenty to read on DKPittsburghSports.com from over the weekend. I've got 2 Chalk Talks up there. Right at the top of the Steelers page right now is the most recent one I wrote. Like I said, it's on Zach Frazier and Mason McCormack both. Some breaking down a film, taking a closer look at both of those guys, what they bring to the table. And then I'm even going to do a couple extra, or at least one extra this week, maybe two, because I want to do one on Roman Wilson. And I want to do one on Peyton Wilson. I might even want to do one on each of the 2 6-rounders, and Lee and Watts. Might want to look at those guys too. But definitely, no matter what, I'm going to do at least one more this week. And then eventually, I'll like I said, both of the Wilsons will be done. We'll do deep dives on all these guys, but to your point, AJ, you said very excited to see what Danny Smith can do with some of these guys. So here's the thing, and like, yes, I think Danny Smith will obviously get his hands on some of these guys, but I mean, Fou Tanu, Frazier, to me, Fou Tanu might not be giving it right away because Dan Moore's still there. Just because we all assumed that Broderick Jones was going to come in and automatically be a automatic starter, and he did. He ended up sitting behind Moore in a core four, but still, Fou Tanu can come in and probably start day one. Frazier can come in, start day one. McCormack, obviously, you're looking at more of in depth. Roman Wilson, I don't know how much or if he'll do anything on special teams, just because he'll probably be asked to do more on offense. Peyton Wilson might be the same way, but I really am the one guy who I think could actually might end up having the biggest impact on special teams is Ryan Watts if he makes the team. And so, but still, like, I honestly think that's why I think this class is so interesting, just because there are so many guys, like more than half of the picks can go in and really compete right away for starting jobs. So Jax asks, is there a gunner on the team right now? No, there's not. You don't want gunner on the team. And plus, you don't need a gunner on the team because you have Cordero Patterson, who is probably the best returner the Steelers have had in a long time. And given the fact that the rules have changed with kickoffs, and they will typically become or are expected should expected to become a bigger part of the game. It's good to have a guy who knows what he's doing. Mike in Texas asks, who thinks we will bring in another wide receiver before camp starts? I don't think they're done adding to that room. Whether it's a free agent or whether it's a trade, I think that they're going to add eventually to the receiver. And Randy kind of had the same concern. Drafting only one receiver, Chris. Do we currently have enough in our wide receiver room? Enough bodies, yes. Enough talent, or enough guys who can really. Let me put it this way: the Steelers need another guy who can start on the outside. Roman Wilson can do it, but I wouldn't want to throw him in on the outside and have him play there most of the time. I think Roman Wilson's best served in the slot. They need a guy who can play on the outside. Right now, the top choice for that would probably be Van Jefferson, and I don't know how I feel about that. I do think I think they add to the room. With what? I don't know. I don't know how. I still am very, very skeptical that the 49ers will trade Brandon Ayuk or even Deebo Samuel. I'm very skeptical of that. I'll believe it when I see it. Not saying it's impossible, but I'll believe it when I see it. And then Cortland Sutton might be the most likely trade target. I know there have been talk earlier in the offseason about Terry McLaurin. So maybe, I don't know, but they definitely need to add. Rico with a $10 contribution. Appreciate that. Rico asks, do you think they should have gotten a corner in the fourth? I would not change a thing about how the draft went. Not one thing. Not one. I would no. When I would also give this, like, if I were grading, I hadn't given out a grade, but I guess I can right now because it doesn't take me okay, really, really quick before I answer that. Steel King says, Fou Tanu in Pacific Islander culture, pronounce all the vowels. Okay. I'm not going to argue with that. And I definitely do not know about the culture, but I heard on the conference call, Troy pronounced it for everybody. And he said Fou Tanu is the pronunciation. Like, that's what he said on the conference call. So since it came from him, that's what I'm going to go with. But to go back to your point, Rico, like if I could give this draft a grade, I'm giving it an A+. And if there's an A+, you pretty much aced it. You're not, if you ace a test and somebody hands it back to you and says, do you want to change anything? You'd be like, no, I got everything right. So no, I'm good. Like, and possibly get a lesser score. Like, no, I thought adding McCormack made a lot of sense. And see, there are some people right here. Brian says McCormack at 119 was a huge mistake. Had a choice of either Pritchett or obviously a few different, corners or defensive ends. I disagree. I think, again, like a lot immediately whenever the pick was made, I was like, okay, I know they liked him a lot because they had not only they had him in for a pre-draft visit, but I knew that they liked him a lot. But the more and more I thought about it, we even talked about this with Fou Tanu, is that if the worst case scenario with him is that if he doesn't stick a tackle, you can slide him back to guard, because guess what? James Daniels he's a free agent after this upcoming season. Nate Herbig is also a free agent after this upcoming season. Like they will have the interior line will get a lot thinner at the end of the season, no matter what. And so adding McCormack in the 4th round, a guy who was far and away the best offensive lineman in the entire FCS, and looked like definitely held his own, did more than hold his own whenever he played against big time schools, Power 5 schools like Iowa. Shoot, man, like the dude's a mauler. He's a finisher. And I mean, just because he plays a position that the Steelers don't need right now doesn't mean that it's a bad pick. Again, the draft is not for addressing needs. The draft is for getting the best players you can to make your team better, both in the upcoming season and in the long term. And I definitely view McCormack as a guy who can spend a season as a depth guy, play behind James Daniels, Isaac Seumalo, and then possibly in year 2 become a starter by chance. I think it's a phenomenal pick. Is it my favorite pick in the draft? No, it's not. My favorite pick is Peyton Wilson, just because best linebacker in the class at 98th overall. That's a no-brainer. So and Mark says, corner would have made this team better. But again, I'd have to go back and see who all was on the board at the time. But, again, I don't like going into any round thinking we got to take this position in this round. Like when 51 came up, I'm saying Zach Frazier, because number one, I didn't think he'd fall to 51. And number two, you look at everybody else on the board, like, were there some other players there that were probably could be considered a best player available? Yeah, probably over Zach Frazier, but wasn't necessarily at a position as significant of a need as center is for the Steelers. No. So maybe receiver, but when you have a chance to get like your guy, you identify guys that you want to get in the draft. You have a certain round that you can possibly get them in. They probably knew, like, we love Zach Frazier. And I know for a fact that there were multiple coaches that loved Zach Frazier, but they weren't going to reach for him at 20. Like, if all the tackles were gone, they weren't going to be like, well, we really like Zach Frazier, so let's reach way above and no, like, we're not doing that. But 2nd round, he gets within our range. And Omar Khan said that they were having conversations about possibly trading up, but they stayed patient. They trusted their intel. There he was at 51. They didn't even have to trade up for him. It's the same situation when you go into each round. You can't just go in and be like, oh, we needed to take this position in this round, or we needed to take this position in that round. Like, you have to take what the board gives you. Unless there's a guy that you just absolutely have to get and you're willing to pay a little extra to go get him. But I don't. I I have no. I would not have done anything different with this class. Nothing. Even the sixth rounders, like, some people, if you really want to get nitpicky, you could talk about, or there were better options in the sixth round. Well, the sixth round is probably the biggest crapshoot of it all anyway. And you want to talk about they needed to add depth on the defensive line. Okay, well, they did that. They added another body, and they added a guy who's a really good defensive end fit in a 3-4 defense. And so, and then they added a corner that's really physical that could play multiple positions. So again, I have no. I'm not going to sit here and try to tear down a draft class based off of sixth round picks. You really are grasping at straws at that point. So I'm not going to do that. Yeah, would you have liked to see the Steelers, possibly, it's one of those things. It's like any offseason. You're not going to address every single hole in the roster. It's impossible. You're not going to, especially whenever you're in a situation like the Steelers are in, where they were 3, 4, 5 positions that really needed some significant upgrades. It's almost impossible to try to get all of those positions better. But shoot, man, like, we really want to talk about it. When you look at the cornerback room right now, compared to what it was at the end of last season, it is better than it was at the end of last season. Anybody want to argue that? Like, Dante Jackson, he's not my favorite player, and there are some significant concerns that I have about his game, but he's better than Levi Wallace. He's better than Patrick Peterson when he was playing on the edge, like the way Patrick Peterson is right now. I like Patrick Peterson in the slot and at safety. But on the outside, I'm sorry, if you're making me choose between Dante Jackson or Patrick Peterson when it comes to strictly playing on the outside, I'm sorry, I'm choosing Jackson. Same thing with Levi Wallace. Levi Wallace was getting cooked last year. I understand the year before he had like 5 picks. That's great, but man, I don't know, man. Slanax asks, what about bringing back Pat Pete as a depth piece? I think it's still an option. Definitely, give yourself, give yourself more options there. It's possible. I know Cam Sutton's name is going to come up because, there was a report that he met with the Steelers before the draft. I understand the legal concerns there, but I don't know. And Chris B71 says, what happened to all the love for Corey Trice? That's another guy who I want to see in camp. I want to see get out of camp. I want to see him play in a preseason game. Like, I want to see what he does when he's actually in a stadium, not wearing practice jerseys. Like, I the same thing with Darius Rush. Now, I know Darius Rush actually got onto a field last year. But man, like, I'm intrigued in those guys too. I think they need to add to the room before the season, and I expect them to do so. But yeah, they definitely need to add more to it. And remember, the draft is not the last bit for teams adding. There's like a second wave of free agency and trades that happen after the draft. There's just, there's that initial wave that goes on for a couple weeks, and then it just kind of slowly dies down. And then those like couple of weeks, like that gap between the annual meeting and the draft, things get quiet really quick, just because at that point, all attention starts to go to the draft. And then after the draft, then it becomes, okay, now we can ramp things back up. Where are holes now? Obviously before the draft, center might have been the Steelers' biggest need, either center or receiver. And they got themselves a plug and play center in the draft, and they added to the receiver room. Granted, it was just one guy, but it's a really good guy, a guy who can probably step in and become at minimum wide receiver 3 right away. Now you can go, okay, what are our biggest needs? Okay, receiver still kind of a big need. Really want to get an outside guy there. Could add to the cornerback room. Don't really need to add to the linebacker room because, man, Patrick Queen, Peyton Wilson, Landon Roberts, Cole Holcomb, like, geez. Linebacker's deep now. Defensive line, feel a little bit better about it. Could add a little bit more to it. Could add maybe another guy, another, depth option. but it won't be anything that's, significant, I don't think, and doesn't necessarily need to be. The holes are a lot thinner, or I'll say the holes are more addressed now. Still some filling out that needs to be done. Totally expect that to happen. I expect wide receiver to be addressed. I expect cornerback to be addressed. So we'll see what happens. It's not going to be perfect immediately after the draft. There's still more to go. So, and Chris says it here, wide receiver is still the thinnest. I think that receiver room, if they were to add, let's just be hypothetical here. Let's just say they find a trade route and get Cortland Sutton. That receiver room, I feel a lot better about, because now you have George Pickens and Cortland Sutton on the outside. You got Roman Wilson in the slot, and then you have a bunch of depth guys like, Van Jefferson, and I can't remember his name, the kid from the Eagles, and Calvin Austin. It feels a lot better once they get that second outside guy. I don't think they need to add, 2 or 3 more guys. It's just if they can add one more guy who can be a legitimate receiver on the outside, I feel a lot better about it. Thank you, Spice Creations. Quez Watkins. I don't know why his name was escaping me. But again, it doesn't need to be, okay, then you still need to add 2 or 3 receivers. Like, no, get one more guy who can be a real legitimate pass catcher on the outside. Feel a lot better about it. And it's kind of the same thing with cornerback. I mean, Ryan Watts could possibly be a guy who competes for slot corner, but I'd feel a lot better about it if it were like Patrick Peterson, or, if legal issues aside, if everything feels good about that, Cam Sutton. Because if you got the Cam Sutton that the Steelers had in 2022 playing the slot corner with Dante Jackson and Joey Porter Jr. on the outside, I feel a lot better about cornerback. But then again, Cam Sutton's been through a lot since he left Pittsburgh, so we can't just assume that he can just step right on the field and no big deal. He's been through a lot, especially off the field. So, and by his own fault. I mean, you get into legal trouble the way he did. I mean, yeah. Anyway, probably going to go ahead and wrap up the show, but definitely here, I'll do one more since we were on the receiver stuff, and we have plenty of time to digest way more of this throughout the week. We don't need to try to jam it all into one episode here. Mr. Nigger Time asks my favorite free agent receiver who fits best. My Gallup, Thomas, Hunter Renfrow, DJ Chark, OBJ. Of that group, I mean, none of them are really that interesting to me. Maybe Gallup. I'd feel a lot better if it was. I'd feel a lot better if it was Cortland Sutton. I'll put it that way. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe Michael Gallup. No, not Hunter Renfrow. I don't know if I want him. Again, they need help on the outside. Michael Thomas over the hill. No, thank you. Same thing with Odell Beckham Jr. No, thank you. The only 2 names on there that are really interesting to me are Gallup or Chark, but I don't know exactly how I feel about that. If it's Michael Gallup, I don't. Yeah. And Mike in Texas says that isn't Chark a good blocker? I think so. I honestly don't know too much about Chark, to be completely honest. I know a little bit, but yeah, again, it's like none of the. It also depends on the cost. If you get DJ Chark for $5 million a year, $6 million a year, all right, I might do that. Maybe even less than that. I'll do that, but I don't know. Maybe Michael Gallup is the best out of that group, but. Again, if the Steelers can pull off possibly a trade for Cortland Sutton, feel a lot better about it. But we'll see what happens. We have plenty of time to get more into how do they address receiver from here on out? How do they address corner from here on out? Still got plenty to go. So, all right. Thank you guys so much for joining today. For all of your comments, for all your questions. Hope you guys enjoyed the draft. In my opinion, you should. This was a phenomenal draft for the Steelers. I thought they did. Like I said, I thought they aced it. I thought I thought every selection, especially in the top 4 or even top 5, their first 5 picks, man, I mean, legitimately all 5 could end up becoming starters at one point. And not just starters, but starters that could really, really, really contribute. Yeah, I think it's a phenomenal class. Obviously, we'll see. We'll see what happens. You can't judge a draft class until those guys at least get on the field. Shoot, we can't even judge last year's draft class yet because it's only been a year. We got a ways to go before we can really say the 2024 draft class was all like phenomenal, or man, the expectations were never lived up to. But all we can do right now is go based off of what we've seen these guys do in college. It looks like a phenomenal class for me. So thank you guys. I'll be back on the show tomorrow. Same time, 3 p.m. Eastern. Catch you guys on the Flippity Flip. See you later.